Hi everyone, welcome to our channel Rovertech, your ServiceNow learning partner. Hope everyone is doing good. Today we are going to learn about the transform maps in ServiceNow. So what are transform maps? So transform maps are used for loading of data into ServiceNow tables from external source. So this will be useful when you want to load bulk data into ServiceNow. Let's see what are the key components in transform maps. Source table. Source table can be called as landing or staging table where the data from external source first lands into. Target table. This is the table where you want to load your data into. Field maps. This is where you define which field in the source table should be inserted into which field in the target table. Transform scripts. Scripts that are used for data manipulation. There are different types of transform scripts and each have its own significance. So these are the transform script types available in ServiceNow. For example, when you define an on before transform script, it will run the script before each record is being inserted into the target table. Let's say you define a validation to the field called CT in the source table. This script will validate the data in that field for every record before that is inserted in the target table. So let's see what is the process involved in transform maps. So first it will be the data. So the data will be from the external source. It could be of CSV or Excel sheet or data sets. Data sets means, for example, when you are importing the data from an integration, you will get the data from that integration. First step will be the data that imports into the landing table. And then it moves to transform execution. It executes the insertion of data. So this is where the field map comes into picture. So when you define the source field and the target field, so when the transform executes, it picks the data from source and inserts into the target record. So once it is completed, the data will be loading into target table. Now let's see in real time how this is being used. See how we are going to load the data into a ServiceNow target table using transform map. So I'm going to use the location table for now. It's cmn underscore location list. So this is the data we have in this table. Let me filter this with the created date. Okay, so there is no data as of now that is created today. So as we discussed earlier, the first step will be the landing table where the external source data is getting imported into as a first step. So for that we have import sets. So go to import sets, and this is where we need to define the landing table. So for now I'm not going to use existing table, so I'm going to use a new table. That means I'm going to create a new table for our demonstration, and my source will be the file where I'm using Excel as my data source. So as we discussed earlier, there is an option called data sets. I mean, the external source can be the data sets. So if you see, there is the data source. So this data source are having multiple options here. For example, if we take the LDAP groups or LDAP users. So when we have an integration, LDAP integration with the Azure directory, and you want to transform the data from Azure directory to our ServiceNow. So we will be using these LDAP groups or LDAP users as data sources so that we can import the data from the AD. So for now, we will be using an Excel sheet and we need to select what is the data source here. So I'm selecting my Excel sheet and we need to define from which sheet and from which header we need to consider the data in the source. So I'm using one and one as default. Now I will submit. So my data has been successfully imported. Now, once the data is imported, so what's next? We need to run the transform map. So how can we do that? From here, we can do that. See, if I go to import set, so this is the import set currently which we loaded. And then this is the data you can see. So we have 5 records in our data source. If you can if you open it, so this is the data when currently it is in pending state. So nothing is defined. And then we have create transform map and import log. This is the log of the import which we made a couple of seconds ago. So first we need to create a transform map here. I mean, we need to map the fields here so that, as we discussed, the the fields from the source table will be moved to the target table. For so click on the transform map here. So we'll be having a new page. So here we need to give the transform map name. So I'll give map location, and as we created a while ago, so it is automatically selected and we need to give what is our target table. As we discussed, cmn underscore location is our table where I want to load my data. So there is an option called run business rule. So what does this happens when we check this? So let us say in our target table there are business rules that were defined, for example, like insert or update of a record. So what happens for each and every record that is inserted or each and every record that is getting updated from the data source, those business rules will trigger. So when you load a bulk data into any of the ServiceNow tables, we need to check if we really want the business rules to run or we don't want to run the business rules, because if data is heavy then it may impact the system performance. So for now I'm not checking this one, and we have the other options which we will be discussed in a while. So let's submit this. So my transform map is done. So coming we can, when we click on the run, it won't run because we haven't done the field mapping yet. So for that what we need to do, go, go for the transform maps. See, this is what which we created a while back. Open that. So see, field maps, nothing is there. So what we need to do, the important step here is we need to map the fields from source to the fields from the to the target. So there are two options here. One is auto mapping or mapping assistant. So when I click the auto mapping matching fields, what happens is like system automatically detects the header fields in the source and auto picks the similar from the target table and assigns automatically. So if you want not to be happen, you can go for mapping assistant. So let us say we have name, contact, phone, city, latitude and longitude in our table, sorry, source data, and the same fields will be there here as well. So system automatically fetches these things and auto maps the fields. Let us say the contact, you want to move it into a new field, so that is also can be done. Like we need to opt for the manual one, and then or else we can first auto map match it, and then we can edit it in later ways. So for now I'm going to use auto match for time being. So system automatically detects, see, this is my source field, this is my target field, this is my source field, this is my target field, and we have an option called collies here. So what happens is like this is a true or false thing. So when I turn any field as collies, what happens is like it will check for the duplicates. Let us say I'm having this data, but I have given name as collies, but I don't have any name in repeating manner, or we can say there is no duplicate here. So it will check a duplicate if it matches with the field what we define. Let us say I'm having another record like this. Now if you see, we have given name as collies, and we have a name called admin1 twice. So this will be considered as a duplicate record, and the first record will be inserted and the second record admin1 won't be inserted since we have enabled the collies. So that is how the collies will be used to identify the duplicates. So for now, for the initial thing, I'm just marking it as false, and I'll update this. Okay, I'm not going to use any copy empties fields or force mandatory or new record. Also, all these options. First, let me load the data, and then later on we can discuss about these features. Okay, so I have transformed field. I have mapped the fields. Now just go to transform. So this is my transform map, and this is my import set. Okay, this is my import set which we loaded the data earlier. So just click on transform. So my transform is completed, and this is my import set. This is, you can see the transform history and import log here. Coming to location and refresh this, see all the data what I'm having in the Excel has been loaded into the ServiceNow table within few clicks. So this is how we create a transform map, we make the field mapping, and then we load the data into ServiceNow from the external source. Now that the data has been loaded, let's see the options that are available while loading the data. So first we need to understand this thing, collies. So what is collies used for? So collies, currently everything is under false. So this is a true or false field. When we turn any of this field or all the fields or some of the fields into true, what happens is like while we loading the data into the target table, before loading the data, it will validate for duplicates. So to eradicate duplicates being inserted into the target table, we use collies here. Okay, let us say I have opted collies true for the name. That means my condition will check for the name, and if any duplicate hap is identified, it is not going to insert. So how this collision field works, let us see. I'm just saving my transform map which we created earlier. Okay, so now that we have 5 records that are inserted from the data source earlier. Now what we do is, let's import the same data again, the same set. Let's do one more time. So this time this should be existing one because we already created the landing table, and this is our landing table. And select the file from where you want to load the data, submit this, and now you can run the transform map. Because we have created the transform map, we have mapped the fields, and we have configured name for queries. So run transform map, and this is our transform map, and this is the update set. See, it was updated earlier. This was 35, and this is the new import set just now. Okay, so my transform is success. But if I go to location and refresh, see, no record has been inserted. Why? Because we have opted Colis for the name, and it checks for the name in the source field. So we have 5 names here, and all the 5 names already exists in the target table, so that it finds the source data is a duplicate of the target table, and it aborts the insertion of the data into the target table. So now if we check the transform history here and open that history, okay, this is for 35, right? So you see, when we open the 36 which is just done, it has been ignored, and comment is no field values changed. Okay, so it ignored the data that is being inserted. Now for example, if we remove the colis here, so go to transform maps, open the transform map that we created for this. So now instead of true, I just mark it false. Okay, it has been updated. So now there is no colis defined. That means system is now no longer checking for duplicates because none of the colis has been turned into true. So let's try to import the same update set, sorry, the same excel. So open, submit, run a transform map. See, the transform import set has been updated, and transform, so it is there. Now when I refresh, you should be able to see 5 sim all records again. See, we have 10. So when we enabled colis, for which field we enable the colis, it will check for that field if any such record exists in the target table or not, and if anything is found, it will consider that as duplicate and aborts the action of inserting the data into the record. So this is how a colis field is useful for us. Let's move on to the other option, enforce mandatory fields. So we have 3 options here. One is no, only mapped fields, and all fields. So understand this better, Let me open any record here. So if you see here, we have two fields as mandatory. One is city and one is new field. So I have created this new field to demonstrate this example. Okay, so just refresh and reload this. So now going to the transform map. So currently by default it has been selected as no. That means it is not going to show any impact. But when I select only mapped fields, what happens is like, so if you come down, so this is my mapped fields, this is my source field, this is my target field. However, we have city as mandatory, which is mapped here, but we have new field also defined as mandatory, but it was not mapped here. So only mapped fields will applicable to the fields which are mapped. So now we have this city as mandatory. Let's see, I keep only mapped fields as enforced mandatory fields and see how it is going to work. Okay, just saving this one. Now to understand this, let's just change few data here. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep this as null empty, and I'm going to remove this data. Okay, out of 5 fields or 5 records, I have 2 records with city as empty. Okay, so coming to the location, what I'll do, just remove this data first. I'll just delete. So go back, same process. Choose the file, submit, and run this. So my transform is completed. So when I refresh, what happens is like it will only insert 3 records. See, 1, 3, and 5 are inserted, but it ignored 2 and 4. Why? Why? Because here in the transform map, we have opted for enforce mandatory field as only mapped field. That means it checks all the mapped fields here, out of which the city is a mandatory field. From the source, if you observe, for this record and this record, this source is empty, the city field is empty in the source, so it is not going to consider those 2 records because city is a mandatory field, and in the source that city is not defined for those 2 records, so it is not going to consider any of the 2 records, and it only inserted 3 records. So this is enforcing mandatory fields. That means system will make sure that every record should have the mandatory fields. So if I go back here and see the transform history, see it is showing me complete with errors, and if I open this import set row errors, see row 1 and row 3 city is a mandatory field. The error message is city is a mandatory field. So this is one option, and we have the other option called all fields. So only mapped fields, it will check the fields that are mapped. So out of which city is a mandatory field, and it will check for city only. Now if I select all fields, what happens is like system will check all the mandatory fields in the table. It not only checks for the mapped fields, but it also checks all the other fields also. In this case, when we select all the fields, now system will check whenever we are inserting a data from the transform map, it makes sure that the data source should have city and new field defined for each and every record. Okay, but if you observe our import or our data, so we don't have a field called new field. Okay, so even though I'm having the city field defined for all the 5 records, let's see whether it is going to import this data into the local location table or not. So I'm removing one more time for better understanding. Now come back to the import set, and this time let's see when we select all fields as enforce mandatory fields. So I saved this again, load the same data back. So if you see, no data has been inserted, even though we have all the 5 records having city field populated or defined. Still, we don't have any data in the location. And if we go to transform history, we complete it with error. See, 5 records for each record, u underscore string 1 is a mandatory field. So that means the new field what we defined as a mandatory in the location table, now then we selected enforce mandatory fields as all fields. Now what happens is system not only checks for the fields which are mapped, it also checks for the fields which are mandatory in the table. That means we have city and we have new field as mandate or which are mandatory in the location table, but we have city defined in all the 5 records, but we haven't defined new field here, so that it is not going to consider that record since new field is empty. So it makes sure that every record which we are inserting should have new field defined. So that is the difference between all fields and mapped fields. So once again repeating, if we select only mapped fields, what happens is like system will check what are the fields which we mapped here. Out of them, it will only check the mandatory fields among these fields. So among these fields we have only city mandatory, so that it will check only city field in all the records whether that field is having a value or not. So if value is there under city, it will insert. If there is no value under city, then it is not going to consider and it is not going to insert. Again, if we keep all fields, it not only checks for the fields which are mapped, it also checks for all the mandatory fields in the table. So we have city which is mapped here as mandatory, and new field is also mandatory. So we should make sure that both city and new field are defined in the source data. Okay, so this is the difference between no, only map, all fields. If we select no, nothing is going to happen. System will not consider any mandatory field irrespective of if we define it or not. It will insert a record. So that's the difference here. I have loaded back the data. Let's move on to next options. So we have run script. And we have transfer script. We are not going to touch these two in this session. Let's deal it with in some other sessions. So when, so these are the different types. And I go for on before. So we need to define our scripts here, so it will act accordingly. So let's not touch this in this session. So coming back, we have this copy empty cells. So what does this mean? So let us say I have colis defined for the name. Okay, but when I opted for copy empty cells, what it will do is, if it finds any duplicate value in the source table, and if there is any empty field in the duplicate value, what happens is like that empty field in the source table will be copied to the target table. So let's see in real how it goes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this phone value and save this one. And then we have defined colis for the name. So earlier, if you observe, what happens is like when we define the colis here, it is not going to insert any record if it finds it as a duplicate. But now then we have opted for copy empty cells. So what happens is like in the admin one, which is a duplicate field, that means which is already there in the target table, but it is having an empty field right under phone. So what happens is like the existing record admin one in the target table, in that record the phone value will be overridden with empty value. So it will copy this empty value and places into the existing value. That means it will be the existing phone number will be removed. Okay, let's see how this works. Again, load the same data on the transform. Come back here, reload. See, just updated just now. That means I said if we have colis defined and system identifies a duplicate value, but the duplicate value is having some empty fields, so what happens is like that empty fields will be copied and the existing record will be updated. So that is what the copy empty field do. Now move on to the other option, create new record on empty colis fields. So what does this mean? So when we enable this, what happens is like import set, while we are importing the data, it creates a new record when the colis fields in the source are empty. Like if the colis field is empty on the source, the system will create a new record in the target table instead of trying to match on that empty value. That means if we have empty fields defined on the colis fields, so instead of marking them as duplicate, system will consider each record as a separate record or new record and it will insert. So let's see how this is going to work. So I have enabled this create new record on empty colis fields, and you see we don't have any empty fields under the name. So but we have defined colis for the name here. So let's import a new data. So what that new data is this one. If you see, there are two empty fields here. Okay, And in that one, we have the other two fields, admin 2 and admin 3, which already exists in the system. Okay. So if you see here, we have admin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the data which we are about to load is having admin 2 and 3 and two records with empty name. Okay. So load it. This time it should be the different file. Submit. Run the transform. Now if I come back and refresh, see in the new file we have admin 2 and admin 3 which are already exists, and we have different queries for that one. So system considers those two as duplicates and it is not inserted. But when comes to the other two which are same with empty name, so instead of considering them as duplicate, system considers them as a new record and it inserted those two records. So this is what happens when we enable the create new record on empty collies fields. That means system, when this is defined and the collies field if any are empty, so system will create a new record instead of making them as duplicate, or no it will insert the record into the target table. So this is what the transform maps are and the different options that we have in transform maps. Hope you understood today's session. Please comment if you have any queries. Thank you.